Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're exploring 5 deeply unsettling stories from the Appalachian Mountains. Stories about people who ignored the warnings, who thought they knew better, and who discovered too late that some rules exist for a reason. From a city transplant who learned the hard way why locals never enter the woods after dark, to a solo hiker who encountered something that shouldn't have been able to speak, and even someone currently trapped in a situation that can't escape from, this collection has stories that will make you think twice before venturing into isolated places. These are all accounts I found genuinely disturbing, and I hope they resonate with you the way they did with me. The last one especially got under my skin. It's about someone who's living through an ongoing nightmare right now, still trying to find a way out. So if you have any thoughts or advice, drop them in the comments. As always, thank you so much for being here and supporting the channel. It means the world. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step into the shadows of the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
I'm writing this because my wife keeps telling me I need to talk about it. Says bottling it up isn't healthy. Maybe she's right. This happened 12 years back when I was 22 and thought I knew everything. Fresh out of college, I just moved from Baltimore to join my wife in her hometown, deep in the Appalachian foothills. She'd grown up here, knew every trail and hollow. I grew up with traffic lights and 24-hour convenience stores. The adjustment was rough. I missed the energy of the city, the constant hum of activity. Out here, everything shut down by 8. The silence felt oppressive, unnatural. My wife warned me repeatedly about the local customs. Don't go into the woods after sunset. Keep your distance from the tree line. Don't answer if you hear your name called from the forest. I nodded along, but privately thought she was being dramatic. One evening, her old college friends came over. We drank, laughed, stayed up too late. My wife, who rarely drinks more than a glass of wine, overdid it and crashed early. I cleaned up the kitchen, expecting to feel tired, but instead felt restless, energized. The house suddenly felt claustrophobic. I wanted to walk, to see what the area looked like at night. My wife was dead asleep. What harm could a short walk do? I stepped outside into a town that looked abandoned. Not a single person on the streets. Every window had curtains drawn tight. Even the street lights seemed dimmer than they should be. No dogs barking, no cats prowling, nothing. I told myself I'd just walk to the forest edge and back. 5 minutes there, 5 minutes back. When I reached the tree line, I noticed the absence of sound immediately. The usual chirping and rustling I'd heard during daytime hikes was gone. Just nothing. I stepped past the first few trees, telling myself I'd only go a few yards in. The temperature dropped instantly, not gradually, instantly, like stepping from a warm room into a freezer. Summer air became winter air in the space of 3 steps. I decided to turn back. That's when I realized I couldn't find the road. I'd walked maybe 60 seconds in a straight line. The road should have been right behind me. Instead, there were only trees. Dense, identical trees in every direction. Then the fog rolled in, thick, unnaturally fast. Within seconds, I could barely see 3 feet ahead. I started walking faster, then jogging, my heart hammered. This wasn't possible. I'd walked in a straight line for 1 minute. How could I be lost? That's when I heard the footsteps. They matched mine perfectly, step for step. I stopped. They stopped. I walked. They walked. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. I started moving again. The footsteps resumed, perfectly synchronized with mine. I stopped again and scanned the fog. That's when I saw it. A silhouette, human-shaped, standing perfectly still about 15 feet away. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. My lungs burned. My legs felt heavy like I was running through water. I've always been athletic, a runner, but the air felt wrong, thick, resistant. Finally, I saw light. I burst through the tree line onto the road, gasping. I didn't stop running until I was inside the house with the door locked behind me. I stood there, back against the door, trying to make sense of what happened. Had someone followed me? Had I drunk more than I realized? Was I losing my mind? I never told anyone, not even my wife. The embarrassment felt overwhelming. 12 years later, I still live here. I love it now, actually. But I've never gone into those woods at night again. And sometimes, even inside the house, I'll feel that same cold air brush against my skin. And I'll remember that night when the forest decided to show me I didn't belong there.
This happened to me 3 months ago. I'm still trying to process it. I'm 42. For the last decade, I've dealt with chronic insomnia and nightmares that leave me exhausted. My therapist suggested I take up hiking, something about nature and mental health. So last spring, I planned a solo trip through a remote section of the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. I researched extensively, planned my route, packed proper gear. I'm not reckless. I'm careful to a fault. The first day went smoothly. The second day, I met a woman near a creek. She looked to be in her 60s, gray hair in a braid, wearing clothes that seemed oddly formal for hiking, almost Victorian. She smiled and said, "You're heading toward the old settlement, aren't you?" I hadn't mentioned my destination to anyone. "How did you know?" I asked. She laughed. "Oh, I can always tell. You have that look about you, curious, drawn to forgotten places." She told me there was a shortcut, a path not on any maps that would save me hours. She described it in precise detail. Turn left at the split oak, follow the creek until you see 3 white stones, then head uphill. Something felt off about her, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was how clean she looked, how her clothes didn't match the terrain, how she appeared without me hearing any footsteps. I thanked her and moved on, deciding not to take the shortcut. That night, I camped near the official trail. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of someone walking around my tent. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling me. I grabbed my flashlight, but didn't turn it on. I listened. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard a voice, the woman from earlier. "You should have taken the path I showed you," she said softly. "It would have been easier." My blood went cold. "I'm calling the police," I said, trying to sound brave. She laughed. "Go ahead. They won't find anything." I turned on my flashlight and unzipped the tent. No one was there. I packed up everything in the dark and started hiking back toward the main trail by moonlight. I didn't care about finishing the trip. I just wanted out. As I walked, I saw her again. She was standing between 2 trees, perfectly still, watching me. "You're going the wrong way," she called out. I kept walking, refusing to look back. I made it to my car by dawn, drove straight home, and haven't been back since. A week later, I looked up that area online. Turns out, 3 people have gone missing there in the last 5 years. All of them were last seen near that same creek where I met the woman. I don't know who or what she was, but I know I'm lucky I didn't take her shortcut. I was 35 when it happened, 7 years ago now. I'd been hiking the Appalachian Trail for years, always with my friend Marcus. But that spring, Marcus's wife was due with their first child, so I decided to go solo. I'd done plenty of day hikes alone, but a 3-day trip didn't seem like a stretch. The first day was perfect. Clear skies, moderate temperature, beautiful views. That evening, I met another hiker at a rest point. Older guy, maybe late 50s, wearing expensive gear. He introduced himself as Richard. We chatted for a while. He mentioned there was an incredible overlook about 2 hours off the main trail. Said it was one of the most stunning views in the entire Appalachian range, but hardly anyone knew about it because it wasn't marked on any maps. He gave me detailed directions, said the path was a bit overgrown, but totally worth it. I thanked him and made a mental note. I'd check it out the next day. That night, I slept well. The next morning, I decided to find the overlook. I followed Richard's directions exactly. The path was indeed overgrown, barely visible. After about 90 minutes, I started wondering if I'd missed a turn. That's when the ground disappeared beneath me. I fell hard, landing in a deep pit. My right arm slammed into something sharp, a wooden stake sharpened to a point, driven into the ground at an angle. It pierced straight through my forearm. The pain was indescribable. I screamed, but the sound seemed to get swallowed by the pit. I looked around. The pit was at least 12 feet deep. The walls were dirt, too loose to climb, and there were more stakes, dozens of them, arranged deliberately across the bottom. This wasn't a natural hole. Someone had dug this. Someone had sharpened those stakes. Someone had covered it and waited. Richard's face flashed in my mind, his insistence, his detailed directions. I'd been set up. I tried to pull my arm free, but the stake had gone through completely. Moving sent waves of agony through my body. I don't know how long I was down there. Hours, maybe. The pain made it hard to think. Then I heard footsteps above. Someone pulled back the covering. I looked up, expecting to see Richard. Instead, I saw a woman. She stared down at me for a long moment, then disappeared. Minutes later, she returned with rope. She lowered it down. "Grab it," she said. "I can't," I gasped. "My arm!" She climbed down, nimble and fast. Up close, she looked terrified. She wrapped cloth around the stake and my arm, then snapped the stake in half. I screamed again. She helped me climb out, one-armed and dizzy with pain. "You need to run. He'll come back." "Who?" "Run, now." I ran. I don't remember much after that. I collapsed on a road. Someone found me. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. The police investigated. They found the pit. They found the stakes, but they never found Richard or the woman. My arm healed, mostly. I still can't use it properly. The doctors say I'm lucky to be alive. I don't hike anymore, and I never take shortcuts recommended by strangers. I'm a historian specializing in forgotten family estates. 5 years ago, I purchased a 200-year-old mansion in the Appalachian Mountains. The price was suspiciously low, but I attributed that to its remote location and deteriorated condition. The renovations took forever. Construction crews kept quitting. Some refused to return after a single day, citing bad vibes or oppressive atmosphere. I dismissed their concerns as superstition. I finally moved in this January. The first few weeks were quiet, too quiet. The house felt frozen, suspended in time. Even the forest sounds seemed to stop at the property line. Then, small things started happening. A kitchen knife went missing. I found it days later on a bookshelf in my office, next to my letter opener. Strange, but I blamed exhaustion. Then scissors disappeared from my nightstand. They turned up in an upstairs bathroom I rarely used. The pattern continued. Objects would vanish and reappear in parts of the house I didn't frequent, as if something was studying my habits. One night, I was in bed when I heard 3 deliberate knocks on my bedroom door. Everything was locked. I'd checked personally. I called the police. They searched the house and found nothing. A few days later, I went into town for groceries. I mentioned to the store owner, Mr. Charles, that I'd bought the old mansion. He stopped what he was doing and stared at me. "That house has a history," he said quietly. "Everyone who's lived there has disappeared. Not died, disappeared. No bodies, no traces, just gone." He explained that according to local legend, the house was built on land that already had an owner, something old, something from the forest. "The house doesn't want to be abandoned," he said, "but it refuses to be lived in." I came home disturbed, but still skeptical. That night, I sat on the porch and stared at the tree line. For the first time, I noticed movement. Not wind, not animals, something else. Shapes between the trees, watching. I went inside and locked every door. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on my bedroom floor. They led from the window to my bed, then back to the window. The window had been locked from the inside. I'm writing this now because I need to leave, but I can't sell this house to someone else without warning them. The problem is, I don't think the house will let me leave. Last night, I packed a bag and tried to drive away. I made it to the end of the driveway before my car died, just stopped. I walked back to the house. The door was open. I hadn't left it open. Something here wants me to stay, and I'm terrified of what will happen if I don't. My father never talks about what happened to him in the Smokies back in 1988. But last week, he finally told me everything. He was 24. He and my uncle planned an 8-day hiking trip to explore an abandoned settlement deep in the mountains. The place had a reputation. Locals said strange sounds came from the ruins at night. They were young and fearless. The fact that a man had recently gone missing in that area didn't deter them. The first few days were uneventful. They explored the ruins, took photos, made sketches. On the third night, my father had a nightmare about being watched. He woke up convinced someone had been standing just beyond their campfire. The next morning, they found fresh footprints near their tent. Human footprints, made during the night while they slept. That day, they hiked to a different set of ruins. An old woman in town had told them about it, said an entire family had been killed there centuries ago, and the place had been cursed ever since. As they approached, they heard something, a sound halfway between whispering and crying, low, agonized, continuous. They followed the sound into the ruins. That's when they saw him. A man, shirtless, back turned to them. His skin was filthy and covered in wounds. His pants were soaked in dried blood. He was biting his own arm, tearing at the flesh with his teeth. He didn't react to their presence at all. My father and uncle backed away slowly, then ran. They left food and water at the entrance to the ruins, then hiked down the mountain to alert authorities. Search and rescue found the man barely alive, severely dehydrated, covered in lacerations and burns. His arm was mangled from self-inflicted bites. There was other blood in the ruins, too, blood that wasn't his. It was never identified. The man never recovered mentally. His wife later said he would wake her up at night, terrified, telling her to hide because the man was coming. No one ever figured out what happened to him during those 2 months he was missing. My father and uncle never returned to the Smokies, and now that I know the story, I understand why. My father never talks about what happened to him in the Smokies back in 1988. But last week, he finally told me everything. He was 24. He and my uncle planned an 8-day hiking trip to explore an abandoned settlement deep in the mountains. The place had a reputation. Locals said strange sounds came from the ruins at night. They were young and fearless. The fact that a man had recently gone missing in that area didn't deter them. The first few days were uneventful. They explored the ruins, took photos, made sketches. On the third night, my father had a nightmare about being watched. He woke up convinced someone had been standing just beyond their campfire. The next morning, they found fresh footprints near their tent. Human footprints, made during the night while they slept. That day, they hiked to a different set of ruins. An old woman in town had told them about it, said an entire family had been killed there centuries ago, and the place had been cursed ever since. As they approached, they heard something, a sound halfway between whispering and crying, low, agonized, continuous. They followed the sound into the ruins. That's when they saw him. A man, shirtless, back turned to them. His skin was filthy and covered in wounds. His pants were soaked in dried blood. He was biting his own arm, tearing at the flesh with his teeth. He didn't react to their presence at all. My father and uncle backed away slowly, then ran. They left food and water at the entrance to the ruins, then hiked down the mountain to alert authorities. Search and rescue found the man barely alive, severely dehydrated, covered in lacerations and burns. His arm was mangled from self-inflicted bites. There was other blood in the ruins too, blood that wasn't his. It was never identified. The man never recovered mentally. His wife later said he would wake her up at night, terrified, telling her to hide because the man was coming. No one ever figured out what happened to him during those 2 months he was missing. My father and uncle never returned to the Smokies, and now that I know the story, I understand why. What happened to me 7 years ago in the Pennsylvania wilderness still keeps me awake some nights. Not because I'm reliving it exactly, but because I'm left wondering how many others have faced the same thing and didn't make it out. My father and I had been planning this section of the Appalachian Trail for months. We'd hiked together for years, tackling various trails across the country, but we'd left this particular stretch unfinished the previous summer. This time, we were determined to complete it. The problem started almost immediately. Less than 30 minutes into our hike, my dad helped a younger hiker navigate some tricky rocks and got his foot wedged badly. The injury wasn't severe, but it was clear he couldn't continue on the steep, uneven terrain ahead of us. The trail we'd planned to take split off from the main path, an old, rarely used route that had gained a dark reputation over the years. People had gone missing there. At least 2 bodies had been recovered. With my dad's injury, that route was now impossible. I was ready to turn back with him, but he insisted I continue alone. I was going through a difficult period mentally, and both my parents knew how much completing this hike meant to me. After his persistent encouragement, I finally agreed, though I shortened my planned route since I'd be solo. He headed back while I pushed forward. That first day went well. I even ran into an old childhood friend I hadn't seen in years. As afternoon turned to evening, I reached the fork where the maintained trail diverged from the abandoned one. Let me be clear. If you're inexperienced, you should never leave marked trails. They exist for good reasons: safety, accessibility, emergency access. But I had plenty of experience, and while main trails are beautiful, they can't compare to the raw, untouched beauty of forgotten paths. I'd been on the old trail for about 45 minutes when I started looking for a suitable campsite. The terrain was too sloped where I was, so I continued until I found flatter ground. The spot I discovered was perfect. The next 2 days were absolutely idyllic. Stunning vistas, bird song, wind through the trees, nature at its purest. It wasn't until I began descending the far side of the mountain, still about 2 days from rejoining the main trail, that things took a dark turn. Halfway down, I found something disturbing. A shredded, blood-stained t-shirt hanging from branches, positioned as if meant to be noticed. It was unsettling. I'd encountered strange people in wilderness areas before. 3 years prior, I'd been robbed on the Pacific Crest Trail, and the previous year, someone clearly under the influence had tried to break into my tent. I didn't scare easily, and I was armed. I kept moving, and eventually found a new campsite. It was more overgrown than ideal, but it offered good shade and flat ground. After setting up, I decided to explore the immediate area before preparing dinner. That's when I found the wire. Stretched between 2 trees at ankle height, barely visible, I only noticed it because unusual markings on one tree caught my attention, and when I bent to examine them, sunlight glinted off the wire. I cut it immediately, both to protect myself and any other hikers who might pass through. This was clearly intentional, a deliberate trap. My unease transformed into genuine fear, something that rarely happened to me in the backcountry. When I returned to camp minutes later, my tent was open. I knew I'd closed it. Worse, my phone was gone. Someone had been there. How had I not heard anything? No footsteps, no zipper sound, and I'd only been steps away. I grabbed my weapon, scanned the area, and made a decision. I wasn't waiting around. I packed quickly and kept moving, every sense on high alert.
Walking through forest at night, especially off-trail, was risky, but staying felt more dangerous. I pushed on until nearly midnight before stopping to eat and listen. After 15 minutes of silence, I convinced myself I'd gotten far enough away. I set up the tent again, intending just to rest, not sleep. But I must have dozed off, because when I woke, it was morning. I stepped outside, and my stomach dropped. Right in front of my tent, stretched between two trees, was another wire. I was preparing breakfast when I bent down near the water and saw it catch the sunlight. My blood ran cold. I had relieved myself in that exact spot the night before. The wire hadn't been there then. It had been placed while I slept. Following it with my eyes, I saw it connected to a makeshift pulley system leading to a 5-liter metal container suspended by thin cables. The container was filled with a strong-smelling chemical. Movement in my peripheral vision. Someone was watching from the trees. I ran for the tent and saw a figure bolting in the opposite direction. I grabbed my weapon and fired. I didn't care about consequences anymore. Whoever this was clearly meant me harm. I heard them crashing through branches as they fled. I quickly grabbed what I could carry and started making my way towards the main trail, pure adrenaline driving me forward. The only comfort was knowing they were a coward. They wanted to hurt me, but only when I was vulnerable. Still, every survival instinct I had was screaming as I moved carefully down, scanning constantly for more traps. I reached the main trail sooner than expected and soon encountered a family that let me use their phone to call for help. Authorities combed the trail after I reported what happened. They didn't find more traps, but they did find my abandoned tent and the metal container, which turned out to be filled with battery acid. It was suspended directly over the trail path, aimed downward. A small nail tied to the wire acted as a trigger. Step on the wire, the nail releases a lever, and acid dumps on whoever is underneath. It was crude but effective. The precision, the chemical choice, it chilled me. This wasn't thrown together by an amateur. And worse, whoever did it knew how to get caught. I've often wondered how someone transported acid into the mountains without being seen. The only explanation that makes sense is someone who knows those woods intimately, someone who's been hunting there for years, who has hidden supply caches, who taps into them at will, someone who sees hunting humans as sport. Since then, I've read numerous similar stories from trails across the country. I even learned about James Scherer, a Forest Service officer in Utah in April 2012, who discovered tripwires connected to traps made of rocks and sharpened sticks, plus a pit lined with sharpened stakes covered with brush. We all need to be more cautious out there. There are genuinely evil people in this world.
What happened 2 weeks ago still doesn't feel real, even though I'm sitting here, safe, writing about it. I never imagined one of the scariest experiences of my life would unfold while I was simply trying to find peace in the mountains. I didn't have a happy childhood. Violence was routine in our house. A father consumed by unpredictable rage, and a mother who, despite doing her best, could never truly stand up to his outbursts. She lived caught between fear and despair. The only time she found superhuman strength was when he threatened to turn his anger on me. In those moments, she stepped in, even at great cost to herself. For that, I'll always be grateful. My childhood was miserable, filled with instability and an almost complete lack of affection or safety. It damaged not just my self-esteem, but my school performance too. It felt like I was born carrying an invisible sentence that I'd never amount to anything. When I was 17, my mom passed away. That devastating loss became a forced awakening. Maybe because I had nothing left to lose, or maybe because I finally realized I couldn't stay in that environment. So at 18, I found the courage to stand up to my father and leave. He could deal with his rage alone. Even if he gave me his genes, he was never truly my father. Leaving wasn't just a step forward. It was an indescribable relief. It's been 12 years since then. Even though the past sometimes feels like an anchor dragging me down, I know who I am now, and little by little, I've been rebuilding what was broken inside. When the darkest moments come,
I think about my mom putting herself between me and my father's fists. That memory helps me push through. I never had many opportunities. When I left home, I ended up living on the streets, which, ironically, wasn't even the lowest point of my life. I was fortunate to meet a volunteer who believed in me for no apparent reason and with incredible generosity helped me regain my strength and gave me an old van. While it desperately needed repairs, it gave me a real chance to start over, a small space that protected me from cold and rain. Since then, I've built a more stable life. I found work, and though the van isn't new, with all the repairs I've done over the years, it's become almost an extension of me. Sure, I could afford a new one now, but this van means something deeper. It represents hope. It marks the moment a stranger took a chance on me. It reminds me there are still good people out there. Whenever I can take time off, I travel through mountains. It feels like my safe space, a refuge where I can breathe and be alone with myself. So 2 weeks ago, when I managed to get 14 days off, I decided to explore part of the Appalachian Mountains. I don't live far, but I'd never had the chance before. Traveling mountain roads in an old van isn't easy, but I'm used to it. I know its sounds, its limits, and I was confident everything would go smoothly. The first few days were peaceful, though a few strange things happened. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke to a sound from the mountains that felt off, somewhere between a distant whale call and a muffled metallic noise. I brushed it off and went to read, convincing myself it was just an animal. But everything changed on the third night. I was in West Virginia, one of the places I'd most wanted to visit, and when I found a good parking spot, a dirt back road near a small creek, I didn't hesitate. I planned to stay 2 or 3 nights and maybe do some short hikes. Things started going wrong that very first night. I'd just finished dinner and was lying in the van watching videos on my phone when I heard a car pass by. It caught my attention because along with the engine sound, there was a strange constant whistling, like a mechanical issue, maybe the exhaust or brakes. What really got to me was how slowly it was moving. That's unusual in areas like that, where the few drivers usually speed through. I tried to ignore it and went back to my video. But less than 2 minutes later, I heard the same car again, this time clearly turning onto the dirt road where I was parked. My unease grew. In urban areas, it's normal to share space with other vehicles. But out in the woods, where there are countless other places to stop, it's suspicious for someone to choose the exact same spot. Even with my curtains shut, headlights illuminated parts of the van's interior. I waited for them to turn off the engine and lights. Nothing. Minutes dragged on. Finally, the headlights went out. I heard one door open and close. Footsteps. Then another door. More footsteps. There was more than one person, and they were getting closer. Panic started creeping in. I've had people mess with the van before, but never somewhere this isolated. One of them turned on a flashlight and tried to look inside. In that moment, I thought about yelling, threatening that I had a weapon, but I had nothing. I'd heard too many stories from other van dwellers that saying the best move is to pretend nobody's inside. Then I heard something that froze my blood. A sharp pop, a bang. They were slashing the van's tires. Whatever chance I had to escape vanished. If I still had doubts about their intentions, those doubts were gone. Then I heard another vehicle approaching. The men moved away from the van, apparently going to meet it. In that moment, fear turned to pure instinct. I grabbed the knife I always carried, slid into the driver's seat, opened the door as quietly as possible, and jumped out. I leaped down a rock ledge and made my way to the creek, hiding in thick brush. I was almost certain they'd heard me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. Even with the noise of the car and voices, I felt completely exposed. I crawled away as quietly as possible, but kept the van in sight. The second vehicle stopped, and at least 2 more men got out. 4. I watched them move toward the van. 2 had baseball bats, 1 had a knife, and the other held something I couldn't identify. They circled the van, confirming they still thought I was inside. When I heard inescapable glass shattering, I started running. I ran like never before, stopping only to catch my breath before continuing. I don't know how many hours passed in that cycle of panic, escape, and exhaustion. The sun was up, and I still had no idea where I was, just a knife in my hand and my phone left behind in the van. It wasn't until around 11 a.m. that I heard a car in the distance and realized I must be near a road. I stayed hidden, afraid those men might still be looking. Only when I heard the distinct sound of a truck did I work up the courage to ask for help. The trucker was surprisingly understanding. He told me something almost identical had happened in that same area about 15 years ago. That shook me to my core. 15 years? Were these the same people, or were there other groups doing the same twisted thing? The police confirmed several similar incidents had been reported in that region over the years. They took me back to where I'd left the van, and the sight hit me like a punch to the gut. It was completely trashed, vandalized inside and out, totally unrecognizable. Since then, I've been staying at a coworker's place. I think my days of living in a van are over. Maybe it's time to rent a place of my own, to accept that as much as that life once saved me, it's not safe anymore. And maybe it never really was.
I'm not much of a storyteller, but I need to get this off my chest before it eats me alive. What happened at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland 2 weeks ago sounds absolutely insane. If I hadn't lived through it myself, I'd probably think it was some internet creepypasta. But it was real, or at least it felt damn real. This all started back in 2017 when I joined a Facebook group for amateur hikers, just people across the Southeast who wanted hiking buddies. You'd post a trail, see who wanted to join, meet up, and hit the woods. That's how I met Marcus, Dylan, Tyler, and Ben. Over time, the 5 of us formed a tight crew, planning 2- and 3-day hikes across Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia, anywhere with trees and elevation. For years, we kept talking about hitting the Great Smoky Mountains, but somehow it kept slipping through the cracks. Bad timing, weather, permits, we had all the excuses. But last April, we finally made it happen. We planned a 5-day trek through one of the less traveled sections, remote as hell, with primitive shelters spaced far apart, steep inclines, and dense forest. We met at the trailhead on a crisp Wednesday morning. There was frost on the grass and our breath fogged when we talked. Unusual weather for late April, but at higher elevations in the Smokies, you can still get cold snaps in spring. The first day was stunning. Clear skies, spring buds starting to emerge, fresh leaves underfoot. That kind of quiet you only get miles away from civilization. We reached the first shelter around 6 p.m. as the sun started bleeding orange across the sky. It was a classic 3-walled wooden shelter, rickety but functional. When we arrived, someone was already there. Unexpected, but not totally unusual. He looked mid-40s, weathered with a bushy gray beard and a backpack that had seen better decades. He said his name was Thomas and claimed he was a hunter. When we asked what he was hunting, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Not sure you'd believe me." We laughed it off. None of us really cared about hunting stories, so we didn't press him. We cooked our meals, told some old stories, and turned in as light rain started tapping on the roof. I remember that morning clearly, mostly because I'd slept unusually well. When I opened my eyes, Dylan wasn't in his sleeping bag. I sat up and spotted him outside, standing completely still, staring at the ground. When I stepped outside, I saw what had him transfixed. The ground was covered in footprints, dozens of them, all barefoot. They were small, maybe a woman's size or a teenager's, but something wasn't right. The shape was strange. The toes were too long, almost like fingers. There was no sign of struggle, no skid marks, just those weird, clean prints stamped deep into wet earth, circling our shelter. We woke the others, hoping maybe one of them had sleptwalked. As unlikely as it was, I wanted it to be one of us, anything to make sense of those prints. But no, everyone still had dry socks on. Their boots were soaked and muddy from the day before, except Thomas's. His boots were bone dry. That alone was strange enough, but his reaction made it worse. While we stood there processing what we were seeing, Thomas barely reacted. He looked at the prints briefly, then calmly started packing his gear.
He told us he'd be continuing alone. We asked if he knew what made those tracks. By the way he answered, it was obvious he did. He said that was why he'd come out there in the first place. Someone asked if it was an animal, and he just shrugged. Then he mentioned something about these mountains being older than we realized. He slung his pack over his shoulder and walked off in the direction of the prints. We stood there staring at each other, trying to make sense of what had just happened. We decided to keep moving too, but in the opposite direction, away from the footprints and away from Thomas. We spent most of that day tossing around theories. Maybe it was locals messing around. We even brought up old legends about strange things living in these mountains. By sunset, we were exhausted, mentally and physically. We just wanted to forget the whole thing. We told ourselves we were far enough away now that whatever it was wouldn't happen again. Even though some of us talked about heading back early, we convinced ourselves it was probably a prank and decided to stick to the plan for one more night. But obviously, we were wrong. New shelter, same thing. It had rained lightly overnight. In the morning, there they were, more of those bizarre barefoot prints. This time there were even more, maybe 11 distinct sets, like whoever or whatever was out there had been pacing around us all night. That's when it really sunk in. Something wasn't right, and whatever it was close, too close. I've always been a heavy sleeper, but Dylan wakes up if a branch shifts in the wind. He kept going on about how there was no way something could have circled us without making a sound, not a snap, not a crunch. Even on soft ground, you'd expect noise, but it was like they floated. 5 grown men dead asleep while those prints were laid down just feet from where we slept. It didn't add up. By the 4th night, nerves were frayed. We were physically exhausted, emotionally wrecked, and the weather turned nasty. Cold, relentless rain hammering the forest. The final shelter was more run down than the rest, like no one had used it in years. We huddled inside, barely talking. Something had changed. The woods felt aware. That's the only word I have for it. That night, the weather was brutal. Even though we were in a shelter, we rigged a tarp over the entrance to block wind and rain. We agreed not to all sleep at once. We'd take shifts. I was on watch around 4:30 a.m., sitting in the dark, mostly just listening to the storm batter the trees. Then I saw movement. Through a small gap we'd left near the tarp, I saw them step out from the tree line. 7 figures, human-like but wrong, too small. Not like little people, but like adults who never fully developed. Every part of them seemed off, frail, undergrown, almost fragile. They were completely naked and somehow unfazed by the cold, walking slowly, silently, circling the shelter like they were studying it. I was frozen, unable to move or speak. I was terrified but weirdly fascinated. What the hell was I looking at? I reached over and tapped Tyler's leg. He woke instantly. I motioned for silence and shifted so he could see. But as he moved, plastic on his sleeping bag made the tiniest noise. The figures bolted, darting back into the forest impossibly fast and quiet, like the forest swallowed them whole. We sat in silence, tension thick. I could feel his body tense beside me. When he finally whispered, he just asked what the hell that was. I didn't have an answer. I was just relieved he'd seen them too, because if he hadn't, I'd spent the rest of my life trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Eventually, we woke the others. No one questioned what we said. I think deep down they already knew something was out there. At least now we could put a shape to those footprints. I don't know if that made it better or worse. Even though they didn't seem dangerous and hadn't done anything to us, in fact, they'd run the moment they heard noise, we decided it was time to leave. We filed a report with the rangers when we got back. One of them took notes and nodded slowly. When we pushed for answers, he just smiled and said, "Lot of stories up in those woods. Most of them don't lead anywhere." But it wasn't the kind of smile that says he doesn't believe you. It's the kind that says he's heard this before, maybe too many times. Now I can't stop wondering about Thomas. That guy knew. I'm convinced of it. He came out there to hunt, but didn't say what. I don't think he was after deer or bear. I think he was after those things. And that thought really saddens me. Despite everything, those things weren't dangerous. They didn't try to interact with us. They didn't try to hurt us. What scares me is how people can't seem to handle the unknown without feeling the need to destroy it.